My phone buzzed against the wooden desk, a faint vibration that I almost missed over the sound of the television in the background. It was another dull Wednesday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. I had just returned from work, my head still swimming with the stresses of the day, and I was looking forward to a quiet night. I glanced at the screen and saw that it was Emma calling, my wife of 10 years. "Hey, babe," I answered, the fatigue evident in my voice. For a moment, there was no response. I frowned, pulling the phone away from my ear to check if the call had dropped. But no, it was still connected. "Emma, you there?" Her voice came through finally, but it was off, distant, distracted. "Oh, hey, sorry, I didn't hear you at first. What's up?" "I was just checking in," I said, trying to shake off the unease that her tone had instilled in me. "You sounded weird there for a second. Everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. I'm just in the middle of something." She paused, and I heard a muffled sound in the background, like someone else's voice. My grip on the phone tightened instinctively. "Are you at home?" "No, I'm out with a friend," she replied too quickly. "I'll be home a little later tonight." There was that voice again, clearer this time. A man's voice, low and murmuring something I couldn't quite make out. "Who's that?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Oh, that's just the TV," she said after a beat, but I could hear the strain in her voice now. She was lying. I forced a laugh, trying to diffuse the tension that was now crackling through the phone line. "You watching a movie without me?" "Yeah, something like that," she replied, her voice tight. "Listen, I'll talk to you when I get home, okay?" "Emma, wait." But she had already hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, a sinking feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. Emma never hung up on me like that. I could feel the anxiety starting to coil in my chest, but I pushed it down. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe she was just having a bad day, and I was reading too much into it. I decided to distract myself. I went back to the living room, turned up the volume on the TV, and tried to focus on the show playing out on the screen. But it didn't work. My thoughts kept drifting back to Emma, to the strange tone in her voice, to that man's voice I had heard in the background. After an hour of restless pacing and half-watching TV, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door. I didn't know where she was, but something was driving me to find her, to understand what was going on. My gut was telling me something was very wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. I drove around the city aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head. But every time I thought about going home, that nagging feeling of unease would flare up again. Finally, I decided to check one of the bars Emma and I used to frequent before life got too busy. It wasn't far from where we lived, and I figured it was as good a place as any to start. The parking lot was nearly full, and as I pulled in, I spotted Emma's car tucked away in a corner. My heart skipped a beat. I had been right. She was here, but why had she lied to me? I parked and sat in the car for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. I wasn't sure what I was going to find inside, but I knew I had to see it for myself. I couldn't just sit back and wonder. I walked into the bar, my eyes scanning the dimly lit room. There she was, sitting at a table near the back with a man I didn't recognize. They were leaning in close, their heads almost touching, and there was a look on her face that I hadn't seen in years. It was a look of excitement, of interest, something that had been missing from our relationship for a long time. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them. I felt sick, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I wanted to go over there, to demand an explanation, but my legs felt like lead. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. And then, as if sensing my presence, Emma looked up and locked eyes with me. Her expression shifted from surprise to panic, and I saw her quickly say something to the man before standing up. I could see the guilt written all over her face as she hurried towards me. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't find the words to respond. All I could do was stare at her, at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for so long, the woman who had just shattered my world. "Tom," she repeated, her voice breaking. "This isn't what it looks like." "Then what the hell is it, Emma?" I finally managed to choke out. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, the man she had been with came over. He looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Is this your husband?" he asked her. That question, that simple, casual question, sent a shockwave through me. My heart, already strained by the emotional turmoil, skipped a beat. I could feel a sharp pain spreading across my chest, and I knew something was very wrong. I need to sit down," I muttered, clutching my chest as the pain intensified. "Tom, are you okay?" Emma asked, real fear in her voice now. But I couldn't answer. The pain was too much, and I felt my legs give out beneath me. The last thing I heard before everything went black was that man's voice, asking again, "Do you have a husband?" And then, nothing. I awoke to the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the sterile smell of antiseptic. My head pounded as I tried to make sense of where I was. The memory of what had happened flooded back with a sickening jolt. Emma, the bar, the man, the searing pain in my chest. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive. A nurse appeared by my side, gently pressing me back onto the bed. "Take it easy," she said softly. "You're in the hospital. You've had a heart attack." The words hit me like a freight train. A heart attack. I had felt the signs, but the pain of what I'd witnessed overshadowed everything else. My heart had literally broken under the weight of it all. I looked around, my eyes searching for any sign of Emma. But she wasn't there. Panic set in. Where was she? Did she even know I was here? I had called her. I remembered that much, but she hadn't answered right away. When she finally did, the last thing I remembered was that man's voice. "Do you have a husband?" The question echoed in my mind, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper. She had been with him when I needed her most. The realization was like another blow to the chest. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the thoughts away, but they only grew louder, more insistent. The nurse must have noticed my distress because she laid a reassuring hand on my arm. "Your wife is on her way," she said, her tone kind but professional. "She's been notified and should be here soon." I nodded numbly, but inside, I felt nothing but a hollow ache. I didn't know if I even wanted to see her. The woman who had been my partner, my confidant, the person I thought I could trust above all others, had been with another man while I lay on the brink of death. The minutes ticked by, each one dragging like an eternity. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Memories of better times, doubts, fears, anger, and above all, a suffocating sense of betrayal. How could she do this? And why? Just as I was beginning to think she wasn't coming, the door to my room creaked open. I turned my head slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. Emma stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She looked terrified, as if she'd seen a ghost. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hair was a disheveled mess, nothing like the polished woman I had seen with that man. "Tom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, Tom. I'm so sorry." She rushed to my side, but I held up a hand, stopping her from coming any closer. The sight of her, the sound of her voice, it was too much. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, mixing with the hurt and confusion. "Don't," I said, my voice harsh. "Don't come any closer." She froze, her eyes wide with shock. "Tom, please let me explain. It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and hollow in the quiet room. "Not what I think. I think I heard exactly what I needed to hear, Emma. I was having a heart attack, and you were with him." She flinched as if I had slapped her, tears welling up in her eyes. "Tom, I didn't know it was that serious. I didn't know you were dying," I finished for her. "No, you didn't know because you didn't care. You didn't answer my call because you were too busy with him." She shook her head frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Tom, that's not true. I care about you. I love you. I was just... Just what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Just fucking him? Just betraying me? While I was lying on the floor dying?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unforgiving. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The truth was written all over her face. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." "Too late," I spat, feeling the tears sting my own eyes. "You did hurt me, Emma. You broke me." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Tom, please, you have to understand. Understand what? I interrupted, my voice cold. That you threw away 10 years of marriage for a cheap thrill? That you chose him over me, over us? She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I wasn't thinking, Tom. I was confused, lonely. We've been drifting apart for so long, and I just wanted to feel something again. Her words cut through me like a knife. Had we really been drifting apart? I thought we were just going through a rough patch, something every couple experiences. But had it been more than that? Had I been blind to the cracks in our marriage? I never wanted to hurt you, she continued, her voice choked with emotion. I never wanted any of this. I lost myself for a while and I made a terrible mistake. I stared at her, my mind racing. Could I believe her? Could I forgive her? The pain in my chest had nothing to do with my heart attack now. It was a deep, aching pain, the kind that comes from realizing that the person you loved most in the world had betrayed you in the worst possible way. I don't know if I can do this, Emma, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She let out a small, broken sob. Please, Tom, don't say that. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll go to counseling. I'll never see him again. Please. Just give me a chance to fix this. But could she fix this? Could anything ever make up for what she had done? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the life we had built together was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be put back together. The nurse re-entered the room then, breaking the heavy silence. Mr. Thompson, you need to rest now, she said firmly, glancing between the two of us. Visiting hours are over. Emma looked at me, her eyes full of desperation. Tom, please. But I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't deal with the pain in her eyes, the pain in my own heart. I turned away, staring blankly at the wall as the nurse ushered her out of the room. The door clicked shut, and I was left alone with my thoughts, my pain, and the terrible knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the room was deafening, but my mind was anything but quiet. I replayed the events of the evening over and over, searching for some clue, some sign that I had missed. How had we ended up here? How had our marriage, once so full of love and promise, fallen apart so completely? As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized that the answers wouldn't come easily. This was just the beginning of a long and painful journey, one that I wasn't sure I had the strength to face. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just sweep this under the rug. Emma's betrayal had changed everything, and I had to decide what came next. Would I forgive her? Could I ever forgive her? Or was this the end of our story? I didn't know. All I knew was that the future, once so certain, now stretched out before me like a dark, impenetrable void. The days after the heart attack blurred together in a haze of physical pain and emotional torment. I was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest, take my medication, and avoid stress, a near impossible task given the storm raging in my mind. Emma's betrayal played on a loop in my head, a relentless assault on whatever remained of my trust and love for her. I spent most of my time alone, holed up in the guest room that had become my sanctuary. The master bedroom with its shared memories and broken promises was too much to bear. I couldn't look at our bed without picturing her with him, without imagining the lies she had told while we lay side by side. Emma tried to reach out to me, but her attempts felt hollow. She left notes around the house, sent texts pleading for forgiveness, and even prepared my favorite meals, which I barely touched. Her guilt was palpable, but so was my anger. I couldn't escape the voice that had haunted me since that night. The man's voice, asking if she had a husband. It wasn't just the betrayal that consumed me. It was the unanswered questions, the nagging feeling that there was more to this story than Emma had confessed. She claimed it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but something about the way she had acted that night didn't add up. Why had she lied so easily? Why had she been so quick to dismiss my calls, only to answer them when she was already with him? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, I sat in silence, staring at my phone. I hadn't told anyone about what had happened, not even my closest friends. The humiliation was too fresh, too raw, but I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I needed answers. With a trembling hand, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Tom, is that you? Yeah, Mark, it's me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need your help. Mark had been my best friend since college, the guy who had seen me through every high and low in my life. We hadn't spoken much in the last few years. Life had a way of pulling people in different directions. But I knew he was the one person I could trust to help me make sense of this mess. Jesus, man, it's been ages. What's going on? You sound like you've been hit by a truck. Feels like I have, I muttered. Listen, Mark, I need you to do something for me. Something big. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Mark spoke again, his voice was serious. Whatever it is, I'm here for you. What do you need? I hesitated, wondering if I was about to go too far, if I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. But the need for the truth, for closure, was stronger than my fear of what I might find. I need you to find out who he is, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. The guy Emma's been seeing. I need to know everything. Another pause, longer this time. Tom, are you sure you want to go down this road? I'm sure, I replied, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. I need to know, Mark. I can't move on until I do. Mark sighed, a heavy sound that told me he understood the gravity of what I was asking. Okay, I'll see what I can find out. But Tom, promise me you won't do anything crazy. I just want the truth, I said, my voice hollow. That's all. We ended the call, and I sat in the darkened room, the weight of what I had just set in motion pressing down on me. I didn't know what Mark would uncover, but I knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. Days passed, each one more agonizing than the last. I went through the motions of life, but my mind was elsewhere, locked in a relentless cycle of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Emma, to her credit, continued to try to reach me, but I kept her at arm's length, too consumed by my need for answers to engage with her apologies. Then, one afternoon, the call came. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, when my phone buzzed. Mark's name flashed on the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. I answered immediately. Mark? Tom, I found out who he is, Mark said, his voice tight with something I couldn't quite place. Was it anger? Fear? But you're not going to like it. A chill ran down my spine. Tell me. Mark hesitated, and I could hear him take a deep breath. His name is David Brooks. He's a real estate agent. But Tom, there's more. I did some digging, and this guy isn't just some fling. He's bad news. Real bad news. What do you mean? I asked, my pulse quickening. David's been involved in some pretty shady stuff, Mark explained. There are rumors that he's connected to some dangerous people. And Tom, I don't know how to say this, but it looks like Emma might be in deeper than we thought. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm saying that I don't think this was just a one-time thing, Mark said grimly. I think she's been seeing this guy for a while, and I think she might be in trouble. The room seemed to spin around me as Mark's words sank in. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was something darker, something far more sinister. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The lies, the secrecy, the strange behavior. Emma wasn't just cheating on me. She was involved with a man who could ruin both of our lives. Tom, listen to me, Mark said urgently. You need to be careful. If this guy is as dangerous as he seems, you could be in serious danger. You need to confront Emma. Find out exactly what's going on, but do it carefully. And whatever you do, don't let her know you're onto them. I felt the blood drain from my face as the full gravity of the situation hit me. Mark, what do I do? How do I even begin to deal with this? You start by talking to her, Mark said firmly. You need to get her to tell you the truth, the whole truth. But you have to be smart about it. Don't push too hard, or you might push her away, or worse, into doing something reckless. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I'll talk to her. Call me if you need anything, Tom, Mark added. And be careful, okay? This guy isn't someone to mess with. The call ended, and I sat in stunned silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. I had wanted the truth, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. Emma wasn't just unfaithful. She was involved with a man who could destroy everything we had built together, a man who might even be dangerous. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her, had to force her to tell me everything, no matter how painful. But as I stood up and headed towards the door of the guest room, a gnawing fear took root in my chest. What if I was too late? What if this had already spiraled beyond my control? The truth was more terrifying than I had ever imagined, and I was about to plunge headfirst into the darkness, unsure if I would ever find my way back to the light. I spent the next day in a haze, the weight of Mark's revelations pressing down on me like a lead blanket. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces began to fit together. The lies, the evasions, the sudden distance that had grown between us over the last few months. Emma wasn't just unfaithful. She was hiding something far darker, something that threatened to destroy everything. By the time evening rolled around, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The questions gnawed at me, eating away at whatever semblance of calm I had managed to hold on to. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as I stood in the living room staring at the clock, fear crept in. What if confronting her made things worse? What if I pushed her too hard and she ran, to him? The front door creaked open, and Emma walked in. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her face drawn and pale. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the image of her with David Brooks flashed through my mind, and the anger surged back to the surface. "Tom, I'm home," she called out, her voice weary. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk." She froze, her eyes widening slightly at the tone of my voice. "Tom, Don't." I cut her off, my voice low and steady. "Don't try to explain it away. Just tell me the truth. All of it." Her face crumpled, and she looked down, her hands twisting nervously. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. "Start with David Brooks," I said, the name burning like acid on my tongue. "How long have you been seeing him? And don't lie to me, Emma. I already know more than you think." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with shock and fear. "How do you—" "Mark found out," I interrupted, my voice cold. "He knows who David is. He knows what kind of man he is. And now I want you to tell me everything." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she might refuse. But then she let out a shuddering breath and nodded. "Okay, I'll tell you." She walked past me into the living room, sinking into the couch as if her legs could no longer hold her up. I followed, standing over her, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "It started about 6 months ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met David at a real estate open house. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to get out of the house, clear my head. But he was there, and he was. Different, charming, confident. He made me feel, noticed. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to lash out. "And that was enough for you to start an affair?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It wasn't like that at first. We just talked, exchanged numbers. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but I was lonely, Tom. We had been so distant, and I was feeling lost. David was. He was there when you weren't." Her words stung, but I forced myself to listen. This was the truth I had been demanding, even if it tore me apart. "And then?" I prompted, my voice tight. "It escalated," she admitted, wiping at her eyes. "We started meeting more often, and before I knew it, I was in over my head. He made promises, said things that made me feel special. But it wasn't just about the attention. There was something dark about him, something that scared me, but I couldn't pull away." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you come to me, Emma? We could have worked through this." "Because I was ashamed," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. And by the time I realized what kind of man he really was, it was too late. He wouldn't let me go." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, wouldn't let you go?" Emma looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear. "David isn't just a real estate agent, Tom. He's connected to dangerous people, people who do things that you can't imagine. When I tried to end it, he threatened me. He said he'd ruin me, ruin us if I left him." My blood ran cold. This was worse than I had imagined. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I was scared," she cried. "I didn't know what to do. He's dangerous, Tom. He could hurt you, hurt us both. I didn't want to drag you into this. So you just kept seeing him? I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. You kept this going knowing he was dangerous? I thought I could handle it, she whispered, her voice broken. I thought I could protect you by keeping it secret, by keeping him happy. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I turned away from her, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and fear. This wasn't just an affair. It was a nightmare. Emma had been pulled into something far beyond her control, something that threatened to destroy everything we had built. But as I stood there, staring out the window at the darkening sky, a new resolve hardened within me. I wasn't going to let David Brooks get away with this. He had taken my wife, my peace of mind, and now he was trying to take everything else. I couldn't let that happen. Emma had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. But I wasn't going to sit by and let this man destroy my life. If David Brooks thought he could scare me into submission, he was dead wrong. I turned back to Emma, my voice cold and final. This is over. You and me. We're done. Her eyes widened in shock. Tom, no, please don't do this. I'll leave him, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please don't leave me. But my heart had hardened. The love I once felt was buried under layers of betrayal, anger, and fear. There was no coming back from this. You already left me, Emma, I said, my voice steady. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I'll help you deal with him. But after that, we're through. She broke down into sobs, but I couldn't feel anything for her anymore. She had destroyed us, and there was no going back. As I walked out of the room, the echoes of her cries followed me, but they didn't reach my heart. My mind was already turning to the next step, to what I needed to do to protect myself, to protect us from the man who had torn our lives apart. Revenge was the only thing that kept me going now. David Brooks had taken everything from me, and I was going to make him pay. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts twisted and darkened by what I had learned. I realized that there was no turning back. The man I had been before the heart attack was gone, replaced by someone colder, harder, more determined. The next time I faced David Brooks, it wouldn't be as a victim. It would be as a man who had nothing left to lose. The days after our final confrontation passed in a surreal blur. Emma moved out of the house, a quiet, tearful goodbye marking the end of our 10-year marriage. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. My heart had hardened to a point where her tears meant nothing, where her pleas for forgiveness were just echoes in the empty house we once called home. But I wasn't numb. Beneath the cold exterior, a storm raged, fueled by the desire for revenge. David Brooks had taken everything from me, my wife, my peace, and even my health. And now, he was going to pay. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't some movie where I could just confront him and get my justice. David was dangerous, connected to people who wouldn't hesitate to make someone like me disappear if I became a problem. I needed to be smart, calculated, and most of all, I needed to strike where it hurt him the most. The first step was to understand who I was dealing with. Mark had already done some digging, but I needed more. I spent hours researching David Brooks, piecing together his life, his business, his connections. The more I learned, the more I realized just how deep his roots ran. He wasn't just a real estate agent. He was a player in a much bigger game, one that involved money laundering, shady deals, and a network of corrupt individuals who kept him untouchable. But every man has a weakness, and David's was his image. He had built his empire on a foundation of trust and respectability, convincing everyone around him that he was a legitimate businessman. If that image crumbled, so would everything else. I started small. Anonymous tips to local reporters, suggesting they look into some of his real estate deals. At first, it was just a whisper in the wind, easy to ignore. But then, as more tips rolled in, thanks to a few friends in journalism who owed me favors, the whispers turned into murmurs, and those murmurs started to reach the right ears. The first article was a minor one, buried in the back pages of the business section, but it was enough to get David's attention. I knew he'd be watching, that he'd see the cracks starting to form in his carefully crafted image. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I kept digging, uncovering more dirt on David's dealings, shell companies, fraudulent transactions, ties to unsavory characters. Everything I found, I fed to the press. And slowly, the picture of David Brooks as a respectable businessman began to erode, replaced by the truth of who he really was. It was only a matter of time before he realized someone was behind the leaks. But I was careful, always staying one step ahead, covering my tracks. I wasn't going to give him a chance to retaliate. Not until I was ready. Then came the break I'd been waiting for. A reporter from one of the bigger papers reached out, wanting to meet with me. She had been following the story and sensed there was more to it than what had been published so far. This was my opportunity, the moment I had been preparing for. We met in a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop, the kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone kept to themselves. I showed up early, my nerves humming with anticipation. I hadn't been this close to feeling alive since before the heart attack. This was my chance to take the first real step toward bringing David Brooks down. The reporter arrived on time. A sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s with an air of determination about her. She introduced herself as Lisa, and we exchanged a few pleasantries before getting down to business. "I've been following the Brooks story closely," she said, her voice low but direct. "And it's clear to me that someone on the inside has been feeding us this information. Is that person you?" I hesitated for a moment, weighing my options. This was the point of no return, but I had come too far to back out now. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm the one who's been leaking the information. But there's more, a lot more, and I want to make sure it all comes out." Lisa leaned in, her interest piqued. "Why are you doing this? What's your connection to Brooks?" I looked down at the table, gathering my thoughts. He ruined my life, my marriage. He's done it to others too, and I want to make sure he can't do it to anyone else. I left out the details, the personal pain, the betrayal. Those were mine alone to carry. But the resolve in my voice was clear enough. Lisa nodded, understanding that there was a lot more to the story than I was willing to share. "I need proof," she said, her tone professional. "What you've given us so far has been good, but we need something concrete to bring him down. Something that ties him directly to his crimes." "I have it," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of financial records, emails, and other documents I had managed to gather over the past few weeks. Enough to make any reasonable person see David Brooks for what he really was. Lisa flipped through the papers, her eyes widening as she took in the contents. This is exactly what we needed. This could blow the whole thing wide open." I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction wash over me. "When this hits, it'll be the beginning of the end for him." She looked up at me, her expression serious. "You understand what this means, right? Once this goes public, Brooks will know who's behind it. He won't take it lying down." "I'm counting on it," I said, my voice cold. We parted ways, and as I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt the weight of what I had just done settle on my shoulders. There was no turning back now. David Brooks would come after me, that much was certain. But I wasn't afraid. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. The article hit the front page a week later. A blistering expose that laid bare David Brooks's criminal empire. It was the kind of story that couldn't be ignored. The kind that would have lasting consequences. And as I watched the fallout unfold from the safety of my home, I knew that the wheels of revenge were finally in motion. But revenge, I was beginning to realize, was a double-edged sword. It gave me purpose, a reason to keep going. But it also kept me tethered to the pain, to the anger that had consumed me since the heart attack. I had struck the first blow, but the battle was far from over. David Brooks wasn't the kind of man to let an attack go unanswered, and when he came for me, I would have to be ready for whatever came next. But no matter what happened, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be his victim again. Not ever. The days after the expose hit were tense, like the calm before a storm. I knew David Brooks wouldn't take the blow lying down, but the waiting gnawed at me. Each day that passed without retaliation felt like borrowed time. The phone calls from reporters, the looks from neighbors, even Emma's tearful attempts to reach out, they all faded into the background as I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. I kept a low profile, avoiding my usual routines. I knew enough about David's connections to realize that if he wanted to find me, he could. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I'd already changed my phone number, stopped going to my usual spots, and even parked my car in different places each night. Paranoia became my constant companion, but it was better than being careless. Late one night, nearly 2 weeks after the story broke, I was jolted awake by the sound of glass shattering downstairs. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my veins as I grabbed the baseball bat I'd kept by the bed since this all began. I moved quietly down the stairs, every muscle tense, my mind running through worst-case scenarios. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, I could make out a figure moving in the living room, the glow of a flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. I tightened my grip on the bat, trying to steady my breathing. This was it, the confrontation I'd been waiting for. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice harsher than I intended. The figure turned, and as the light from the flashlight caught his face, I recognized him immediately. David Brooks. He looked different from the smooth, confident man I'd seen in photos. More haggard, desperate. The man who had once been untouchable now looked like someone with nothing left to lose. "I knew you were behind this," David said, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can ruin me and get away with it?" "I'm not the one who ruined you," I replied, taking a step closer. "You did that to yourself." David's eyes narrowed, and I could see the fury in them. "You don't know what you've done, do you? You've made a very dangerous enemy." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, and I realized as I spoke that it was true. The fear that had gripped me for weeks was gone, replaced by something else. Determination, maybe, or just a cold, hard resolve. "I've already lost everything. You can't take anything else from me." David took a step forward, his hand slipping into his jacket. I knew what was coming, but I didn't flinch. I was tired of being afraid, tired of letting him have the power. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it. "You think you're so righteous," David sneered, "but you're just like me. You wanted revenge and you didn't care who you hurt to get it." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I never destroyed anyone's life just for the fun of it. I never lied to someone, manipulated them, threatened them to keep them under my thumb. You did that, David, and now you're paying for it." He pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at my chest. My heart pounded, but I didn't move. This was how it ended then, in my own living room, at the hands of the man who had taken everything from me. "I could kill you right now," David said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "No one would even care. I'd be doing the world a favor." I stared at him, unblinking. "Then do it. End it." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. David's finger twitched on the trigger, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to pull the trigger, but something held him back. Maybe it was the realization that killing me wouldn't fix anything. Maybe it was the knowledge that I was right, that he was the architect of his own downfall. Finally, he lowered the gun, letting out a long, shuddering breath. "You're not worth it," he muttered, turning away from me. "Neither are you," I said quietly, the bat still gripped tightly in my hands. David glanced back at me, a mix of contempt and something else, maybe regret, in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You've made an enemy for life." He turned and walked out of the house, disappearing into the night. I stood there for a long time, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. When I finally moved, it was to lock the door behind him, my hands trembling. It was over. The threat, the danger, it was all over. But as I stood in the darkened room, the weight of everything that had happened crashed down on me. I sank onto the couch, the bat slipping from my hands as I buried my face in my palms. I should have felt relief, or maybe triumph, but all I felt was empty. Revenge had driven me, kept me going when everything else had fallen apart. But now that it was done, now that David Brooks was out of my life, I didn't know what to do. The anger that had fueled me was gone, and in its place was a void that I didn't know how to fill. Emma was gone. My marriage was over, and now even the man who had ruined it all was out of my life. I was free, but I was also alone. The life I had known, the future I had planned, it was all gone. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to piece together what was left of my life. I finally reached out to Mark, the only person who had been there for me through all of this. We met up for a drink, and as I told him everything that had happened, I could see the concern in his eyes. You did what you had to do, Mark said, his hand on my shoulder. But now you need to move on. This can't define you, Tom. You can't let it. I don't know how to move on, I admitted, staring down at my drink. Everything's gone. No, it's not, Mark said firmly. You're still here. You're still breathing. And you've still got people who care about you. Start there. Start rebuilding. It wasn't easy to hear, but I knew he was right. The revenge I had sought had given me closure, but it wasn't going to bring back what I had lost. If I wanted to find any peace, I had to start over. Had to figure out who I was without Emma, without the life we had built together. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still days when the memories haunted me, when the pain of betrayal cut deep. But slowly, day by day, I started to put the pieces back together. I sold the house and moved to a new place, one without all the memories of what had happened. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into work, and tried to find joy in the little things again. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a life. And that was something. As the months passed, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I was stronger now, more resilient. I had faced down my worst fears and come out the other side, and that gave me the strength to keep going. Revenge had given me closure, but it hadn't given me peace. That was something I had to find for myself, and in time, I knew I would.